Okay, hi everybody. We are continuing with video commentary for a treatise on white magic, the rules for the astral plane. We're on page 374, and we're starting a very interesting section. It's called The Founding of the Hierarchy. This is, I think, where all of that information on the Temple of Ibez comes from. So let's take a close look at this. The various energies which play upon the human being and produce his unfoldment constitute his field of experience. The more energies detected, the wider the field, obviously. Those two words, unfoldment and experience, should ever be linked, for each produces the other. So we can know many things mentally, or at least have a good theory going, but have we experienced and have we unfolded? That's the question. As one is subjected to experience in the form world, a paralleling unfoldment of consciousness is carried forward. And of course, the unfoldment of consciousness will produce experience. So the two feed into each other. As that unfoldment produces constant changes in realization and a consequent constant reorientation to new states of awareness, it necessarily leads to new experience of fresh phenomena, of new states of being, and of dimensional conditions hitherto unknown. Well, that's the story of it all. Yeah, okay. I'm going to kind of emphasize this because the two feed into each other and create the possibility of, greatly expanded living and a heightened livingness in new arenas of potential awareness, and basically a greater sense of one's identity, or the realization that one's identity is much greater than one may have suspected. Hence, the frequent reaction of the disciple to the fact that for him as yet there is no point of peace. We move on and on to find new experiences which indicate new unfoldments when the experiences are stabilized. That's the thing, you might have some flash, it's a good experience, it's an interesting experience, but is it reproducible at will? That is the issue. All right, peace, and this is, I'm running into these, I'm running into all of these familiar statements in the Tibetan's work. Peace was the objective of the Atlantean aspirant. It's hard really to find it on the table of siddhis, on the table of powers. Realization we can find. Realization is that of the Aryan disciple. And those who are simply looking for peace, even as every grave tells you, rest in peace sounds very boring, doesn't it? Sounds like an impossible hell. You're really held when you are, how it is sometimes when you want to get out of bed and it's time to get out of bed, and for some reason you delay and you're made to stay there. It's a very uncomfortable experience to be made to be without movement when Everything within your mechanism requires movement. So peace was the objective of the Atlantean aspirant. Realization is that of the Aryan disciple. Note the contrast here between aspirant and disciple. He can never be static. It's very, very linked to the planet Mercury. He can never rest. That's perhaps why Master Moria tells us that rest is a change of labor. He is constantly adjusting himself to new conditions, constantly learning to function therein, and then subsequently finding them pass away to give place in their turn to new. This goes on until the consciousness is stabilized in the self, in the one, and I would say that even then, ever new experiences, relatively ever new, lie before the initiate. Then the initiate knows himself to be the onlooking unity, watching the phenomenal phantasmagoria of life in form. This is a great realization. Maybe it dawns upon us every once in a while. We are the onlooking unity. We are that substratum that pervades all possible perceptions, and all that we observe is the phantasmagoria of life in form, and as DK says elsewhere, including associated persons. I mean, all the persons we also watch are part of the phantasmagoria as well. Okay. All right. So he passes from one sense of unity to a sense of duality, and then again to a higher unity. You know, you've seen that picture of the Kundalini rising. It seems to divide and come together and divide and come together, almost like a great series of rising figure eights, you know. He passes from, because we have to disrupt the unity for the sake of experiencing a still higher and more inclusive unity. He passes from one sense of unity to a sense of duality as he's reaching towards this still higher state, and then from thence again to a higher unity. First, the self identifies itself with the form. I wonder why that is capitalized. With the form to such an extent that all duality disappears in the illusion that the self is the form. So this is the first and lowest type of identification. We have then the form constituting apparently all there is, and even some very intelligent people are caught in this type of identification. But of course, when individualization comes along, there is that sense of separation, the Leo individualization, fifth ray, the law of cleavages, the separation of the observer from the observed. We have then the form constituting apparently all that there is. This is followed by the stage where in the indwelling sense begins to be aware of itself as well as of the form, and we talk in terms of higher and lower self. Okay. We speak of the self and its sheaths, and of the self and the not self. Actually, it's a fairly high state because people are already understanding then that they are not the material with which they identified themselves earlier. They are not that perception, they are the perceiver. So the self, true self, is not the perception. Later it is, of course, but the perceiver. Later, the perceiver and the perception are again one, but in a different way. This dualistic stage is that of the aspirant and of the disciple up to the time of his training for the third initiation, and this is partially training in identification of the right kind. Okay, there's so much good here about the progress of the states of awareness of the human being. He begins with the knowledge that he is a spiritual entity confined in form. His consciousness for a long period of time remains predominantly that of the form. You know, look what happened to me. Everything that happens to the body happens to, quote, me, and not to an aspect of the not self. It takes a little bit of inner experience to dissociate the perceiver from the perceived. Gradually this changes, so gradually that the aspirant learns the lesson of endurance, Vulcan, even to the point of enduring the not self, until there comes a life of balance wherein neither preponderates, and we might call this Libra and Leo, and the reversal of the wheel. Okay. Okay, oh, now what? Let's see. Okay. Okay, right. Where neither preponderates. Okay. So this is Libra and involves Leo and the reversal of the wheel. This produces in the man a state of apparent negativity and inertia, which may last for one life or two, and he seems to accomplish little in either direction. You know, that's the balancing process, and we don't give ourselves entirely to the past, which we have proven of lesser value, nor to the future, which we may be uncertain about or may fear. This is for workers a valuable hint in their dealings with people. Now, you know, DK gives so much that will help us help others along the spiritual path. So, you know, just where are the people with whom we are working? That's the issue. And do we estimate rightly? And as he says, you know, the less developed will always overestimate, and the more developed may underestimate. Then the point of balance changes, and the soul appears to dominate from the standpoint of influence, and the entire consciousness aspect begins to shift into the higher of the two aspects. That's not what we want. So the higher of the pairs of opposites. The pairs of opposites begin to be encountered, you know, in that second grouping of petals in the egoic lotus. In the hall of ignorance, there just is nothing or of the real opposite, the experience of the opposite within oneself, of God immanent within oneself. I think some probably very intelligent people can still be working relatively within the hall of ignorance in terms of developing their mind at least, but they don't sense that higher power, that something else, and to speak to them about it is to be not understood or misunderstood. Duality, however, still persists, for the man is sometimes identified with his soul and sometimes with his form nature, and we might call this a kind of Libran Geminian oscillation. Geminian. Okay, this is the stage wherein so many most earnest disciples are at this time to be found, sometimes the personality, sometimes something higher. And I would say probably very rarely the great unity or the great oneness, the all-pervading oneness, if I can say, perceived through infuception, kind of word I've coined to reveal the identification of oneself with the being from which all things have come, or the beingness, I want to say, from which all things have come, and which are, which is all things. Little by little, however, he becomes absorbed into the soul. It's a kind of an alchemical Venusian activity, and thus comes en rapport with all aspects of the soul in all forms until the day dawns when he realizes that there is nothing but soul, and then the higher state of unity supervenes. Well, we might say in a way, nothing but consciousness and even more being. Okay. So, it's not my soul and thy soul, and we no longer use that thought and no longer use the thought, my soul and thy soul. There is one identity. Every once in a while, subtly, it may come upon us. What induces it? It's hard to say, but if we do get the trigger of what induces it, we'll be way ahead, and we'll be able to produce this for ourselves at will. These points need consideration and are valuable, for there are schools of thought, such as the Vedanta and other mystical groups of thinkers, which emphasize the life aspect and appear to negate duality. Well, it's pretty much the Aries Capricorn quality of India and its first ray soul, with emphasis upon the life and not upon diversity. There's always going to be those schools which emphasize one or the other rather than a balanced point of view. Other schools, such as the Theosophical, in spite of denial, teach the fact of the self and the not self, and hence can be interpreted in terms of duality. This teaching is perhaps a necessary stage to help people in the act of discrimination. Both are right and both need each other. The perception of self and not self, or the realization of self and not self, and the perception of oneness, which includes everything and negates dualism. I mean, of course, the latter is in a way, it's more true, but the former is needed for the experiential process and to handle the redemptive work which humanity is meant to fulfill. Both are right and both need each other. And I guess we can ask ourselves, towards which of the two do we particularly gravitate? It should be remembered that in the process of manifestation, we work from a relative unity through duality to another unity in the following way. We work from, okay, it's good to follow this chain of ascending figure eights, as it were. No unity remains exactly what it is, not even the final unity of the universal logos. It has to somehow be broken in the cosmic pralaya and then enter into eventually absoluteness. And, we cannot really predicate anything about it. Anything that we predicate a fallacy will be found. So DK is kind of what can I say here? He's giving us a summary. The unity of form, wherein the self is identified apparently with the form and is absorbed in form life. You don't have the pain of the isolated individuality. Individuality is not emphasized or known. I think something's gone wrong here. I've managed to, you know what I've done here. Okay. Oh, all the mistakes, right? Okay. Duality is next, with fluctuating shift backward and forward between the self and the form, the focus of consciousness being sometimes in one and sometimes in the other. We might say this is, let's call it an interim stage in which many of us find our consciousness at this time, if we are aspirants or disciples. The unity of the soul, wherein naught but soul is seen to exist, and I suppose this includes beingness of some type, and only being, and only being is rigid. I'll tell you, I don't really read ahead, but I guess either my thoughts are very attuned with Master DK's, or I've read it and memorized it in times past. The unity of soul, where naught but soul is seen to exist. Let's just say, let's call it one conscious identity in all and as all, and then only being is registered in consciousness, and this is that initiate state of consciousness towards which we all strive. Okay, so let's see what's going on here. This is not a valid number, okay. This is the initiate state of consciousness towards which we all strive. It comes in subtle ways, you know, and maybe the trigger of induction can be found. Thus, it will be found that both schools are right, and that the dualistic concept is a step upon the way to the essential union with the one life. In other words, let's just say, before the higher reunification, there must be the discrimination of the two, and the consciousness of an apparent duality. You notice how often Master DK uses the word apparent. He's talking in terms of our consciousness. He's not really talking in terms of utter reality. It's how it appears to us. And that, of course, is important. But when the veils lift, how it did appear to us will no longer be the way it does appear to us. It should be remembered that just as the battleground, the Kurukshetra, for the aspirant or probationer is the astral plane, so the battleground for the disciple is the mental plane. There is his Kurukshetra, the great battle which must be won on behalf of the higher forces. The great battle which must be won on the behalf of the higher forces. The aspirant has to learn to control his emotional psychic nature through right control of the mind, and this Krishna seeks to emphasize as he trains Arjuna to take the next step towards right vision. And the disciple has to carry forward his mental attention and through right use of the mind achieve a higher realization and bring into active use a still higher factor, that of the intuition. So these are, what can we call them? We'll call them two significant modes of progression. And the initiate, of course, becomes, disciple becomes the initiate here when the intuition is accessed. And then what happens with the initiate? I imagine the spiritual will must be accessed from buddhi to atma, and from the potential of arhatship into mastership. In himself, the aspirant repeats the racial unfoldment and reenacts the racial drama. And to comprehend this, certain facts about that drama and the work of the hierarchy should be grasped, and here I here enumerate them. The aspirant repeats the racial unfoldment. Well, you know, we, by and large, we are at the stage of humanity's discipleship and should be focusing in an Aryan manner. Okay, so the movement for the spreading of the secret doctrine is 18 million years old, or 18.5 million years old. So let's just say what a decision it must have been to spread the secret doctrine. By that, we don't only mean the book, we mean the great understanding which reveals the truth behind the apparently obvious, behind the form. Only 4 of the original instigators still remain with us. The work, impulsive and controlling, lies now in the hands of 3 groups of lives, if I may so express it. Well, this is interesting, isn't it? You know, and I guess we can say probably Sanat Kumara is one of them. What about the 3 Buddhas of activity? But then, of course, there are the esoteric Buddhas as well. So it's not just the 105 Kumaras, it's the 108 Kumaras. Still, it seems that Sanat Kumara is with us and was instrumental at that time. But let's see what else might be said here. The work now, it's impulsive and controlling. It drives us along. This work impels or drives us forward from very high sources. It's in the hands of those of our earth humanity who have equipped themselves so as to serve, initiates and disciples. It's in the hand of certain existences who have come into our earth scheme of evolution from other planetary schemes and are found in various chains and in various planetary schemes, representing their capital, their sources. It's in the hands of a large number of devas of superhuman evolution. So the work which drives all forward is in the hands of these three groups of lives. Earth humanity. Now, when we say Earth humanity, I suppose we also mean Moonchain humanity, who is completing its evolution here on our Earth globe and in our Earth chain. And extraplanetary existences. When he describes Shambhala, he tells us about the presence in Shambhala of some of these extraplanetary existences. Okay. And then devas of superhuman type who have maybe passed through the stage parallel to that of humanity. These in their aggregate form the occult hierarchy of the planet. So, you know, hierarchy is much more vast than simply the masters of the wisdom with whom we are familiar, right? With whom we are familiar. Working in three main divisions. So the angels are there, extraplanetary lives are there, and members of the human race who are graduates are there. And in 7 groups, as outlined in many theosophical books and summarized in Initiation, Human and Solar, and maybe these are the ashrams. Now, you know, if we have, if 3 types of lives are associated with each ashram, then there are 21 of these groups to be considered, plus the whole, which makes 22. In the very early stages, this hierarchy was called by various names. Among others, it was called the Temple of Ibez. However that's pronounced, Ibez, Ibez, I'm not sure. It's some kind of acrostic. It's some kind of symbol. Okay, so what are we looking at here? It's easy to forget as we elaborate. The aspirant repeats the racial unfoldment. It all started 18 million years ago. There's only 4 of the original instigators as beings, as entities that are with us, that still remain with us. Does that mean that the esoteric Buddhas have come and gone and come and gone and so forth? I'm not sure, but at least Sanat Kumara and the 3 Buddhas of activity are a good guess as to the 4. And this high activity in the hands of three groups of lives. Okay, so the hierarchy is more than just the masters. The devas are included, and extra planetary masters or lives are also included. And in the early stages, and maybe that's more like 17 million years ago, this hierarchy was called by various names. Among others, it was called the Temple of Ibez. I guess South America was its source. Let us consider the founding of the Temple of Ibez. To do this, it will be necessary to consider the period of the coming of the White Brotherhood to Earth and the immediate problem before them to our globe, I suppose. As from the Venus chain into our chain, and to the Venus globe of our chain, and to the Earth globe subsequently. This will involve the recognition of certain facts that have never been adequately considered. It is an acknowledged fact in occultism that for our Earth humanity, the advent of the occult hierarchy was epochal. It brought about 2 things. So a momentous, here we go again, a momentous epochal, how do you pronounce that? Epochal event in the history and even initiatory history of our planetary logos. Okay. So let me repeat this. Number 3. It's one of those instances of being called out, you know. Okay. So 18 million years, only 4 are with us. And we're talking about the founding of the Temple of Ibez. And I'm not sure whether a 3 really belongs there or not. Let us consider the founding of the Temple of Ibez. To do this, it will be necessary to consider the period of the coming of the White Brotherhood to Earth. And by the way, to our globe, and following, let's see if I can get this correctly, following the shooting forth of the solar angels 21 million years ago. And the immediate problem before the Brotherhood, this will involve recognition of certain facts which have never been adequately considered. We have to be so grateful to Master Decay for offering this new information. It is an acknowledged fact in occultism that for our Earth humanity, the advent of the occult hierarchy was epochal. It brought about 2 things. Now, here we are. It brought about 2 things. Okay, assimilation. All right, number 1. The definite crystallization of that group soul, which is now called the 4th or human kingdom. So we, human beings as animal man, started out as a group soul, and were not individualized. The arousing of manas or mind in animal man in a triple way. So the mental unit had been growing. That's one of the amazing things, that it had been growing a long time, even before it was stimulated in such a way to lead to individualization. By the direct incarnation of certain members of the White Brotherhood, in which they brought in the new and necessary factors by transmission to their children. You know, I suppose who could not be as advanced as they by any means. Okay, so this is direct incarnation. And, right. Okay, direct incarnation. By the definite implantation of what is called in the occult scripture as the spark of mind in animal man. Now, I want to say that this is not the mental unit, but I suppose is a type of stimulation of the intensifying of the, well, let's call it the gradually growing mental unit. This is simply a pictorial way of picturing the creation by a direct act of the necessary mental unit or mental apparatus of thought within the causal or spiritual body. The spiritual body too has been gradually growing. I want to look up this mental unit idea and see if I can contrast what is here said with what is earlier said. I think you can see that it's not exactly a straightforward process. It's a gradual process. There appears a triangle on the mental plane produced by monastic activity. And this triangle of fire begins slowly to circulate between the monastic permanent atom and a point at the center of the egoic lotus. This is diagrammed. And thence to the mental unit, now note this, which has appeared upon the fourth subplane through instinct approximating mentality, and I would say over a long period of time. So this whole idea of the mental unit suddenly appearing, maybe it was stimulated in a new way, but I doubt suddenly appearing. What we've just read is this is simply a pictorial way of picturing the creation by a direct act of the necessary mental unit or mental apparatus of thought within the causal or spiritual body. And before there was a causal or spiritual body, there was a center, a focal point arising through instinct approximating mentality. Okay, and this is a short little compilation, and the way it looks, it's okay. Let's see if there's anything else here. Just a little bit of discussion about, well, there are three actually. Position. So it's at the base of the egoic lotus, but until there's an egoic lotus, you do not have the incorporation of this point of instinct approximating mentality into an egoic lotus. Okay. All right. Well, I think we can read this, but the whole idea is take a look at all of these references to the mental unit. It's rather voluminous, and each tells us something. Even the earth, that the earth can be considered as a mental unit. How the logos has one, how the earth, can be considered in a certain relation to be a mental unit. And what I just looked at was the mental unit in relation to the Lemurian period, its relation to the monad. There are a number of repetitions here, but this how it appeared is the important one, and that we have just looked at. Yes, it has appeared upon the fourth subplane, has appeared through innate instinct approximating mentality, and that is not through direct stimulation. Anyway, let's go on. Okay, here we are. So one of the methods, the definite implantation of the spark of mind, and I would say, to me anyway, this means the, this means the stimulation of the form of the mental unit so that the apparatus of thought is really formed and crystallized and increasingly usable. And then finally, this is all about the arousing of manas, and it's done in various ways, which we must remember. By the gradual stimulation of the mental faculty in animal man, and the steady vitalization of the latent germ of mind until it flowered forth as manifested mind. Well, this is a slower process than direct implantation and the stimulation of the animal man by the projected presence of a, let's call it a ray of the solar angel. That's direct implantation. And here, this gradual stimulation, I think some of the lower forms of human beings who will, advance in the next round, I think they are in this place. They are not the hothouse plants, as Madame Blavatsky tells us. In fact, they are really not cultivated through the presence of a solar angel. In a way, they don't have the solar angel yet. So all this covered a vast period of time. Okay. And though the Brotherhood made its headquarters at Shambhala and directed, which is let's call it a supreme point of tension, and directed its activities from there, it was found necessary during the first sub-race of the Atlantean root race to make certain efforts if the evolution of the race was to proceed according to plan. Now, we remember that there were some experiments going on in Lemuria. The whole solar angelic experiment was closely watched. Would it be successful? And by the final sub-races found in Lemuria, it was deemed to be successful. So now we have the coming in of the first root race. It was, overlapping, I guess, with the latter part of the Lemurian race. If the evolution of the race was to proceed according to plan, students of these mysteries, and let us not forget that it's not a straightforward presentation. We have to intuit much and divine much. Students of these mysteries need to remember that though Shambhala is spoken of as existing in physical matter and as occupying a definite location in space, the physical matter referred to as etheric, and the Lord of the world and his assistants of the higher degrees occupying bodies formed of etheric matter, and in a higher way of cosmic etheric matter. Oh, that looks like a good one to do, cosmic etheric matter. So, cosmic etheric matter. All right. Because we know that Shambhala is related to the cosmic ethers as well as to the lesser systemic ethers. So, cosmic etheric matter. And let's get an R in there. Cosmic etheric. Oh, come on. All right. Replace. Yes, indeed. Yes. All right. So we're being given the sequence now concerning the emergence of the Shambhala outpost we call, or being called here, the Temple of Ibez. Okay. And the hierarchy itself was called by that name. All right. It was decided about 17 million years ago, the coming of the hierarchy and the founding of Shambhala being 18.5 million years ago. And these two names, hierarchy and Shambhala, seem grouped together, conflated, not so differentiated, to have on the dense physical plane an organization and a headquarters for the mysteries, and to have a band of adepts and shohans who could function in dense physical bodies and thus meet the need of the rapidly awakening humanity. We might call these then were the God Kings of very early human history. All right, 17 million years ago. We just say the words, but, even a century seems like a long time to the personality mind. And now we're talking millions of years. These kinds of time scales absolutely stymie, confound the average Western thinker, even the intelligent Western thinker, and cause repudiation of our doctrines, because there's just nothing in their mind that can contain the possibility that this would be so, or they have deflected any thought of the possibility that it could be so. The first outpost for the Shambhala fraternity, it's kind of a, what can we call it, a brotherhood, and it suggests, in a way, maleness, perhaps because of the electrical requirements, was the original temple of Ibez, and it was located in the center of South America, and one of its branches at a much later period was to be found in the ancient Maya institutions and the basic worship of the sun as the source of life in the hearts of all men. So, and even the Aztecs, who had some very degenerate kinds of games and rituals eventually, worship the sun. So located in the very center of South America. And I think, in a way, all the discoveries being made now in South America are telling us something about the reemergence of that idea of the first branch. The second branch was later established in Asia, and of this branch, the Himalayan and southern Indian adepts are the representatives, though the work is materially changed. So the second branch, maybe that's the one that we're dealing with right now. And the reason for moving, we don't know. But it's all, probably very much in the hands of the Manu. At a later date than the present, discoveries will be made revealing the reality of the old form of hierarchical work. Let's say it seems in process now. But not fully, of course. Ancient records and monuments will be revealed. This is already emerging from the jungle. Some above ground, those are the ones, and probably tremendous discoveries through the many and subterranean fastnesses. So this is something we have to look forward to. It will not be allowed that the true history of humanity should go forever unknown, and many adjustments of ideas will be required. Thoughts human history will be required. As the mysteries of Central Asia, in the land stretching from Chaldea and Babylon through Turkestan to Manchuria, including the Gobi Desert, are opened up, it is planned that much of the early history of the Ibis Han workers will be revealed. So we have here a simultaneous revelation of the first outpost of Shambhala and hierarchy with the second outpost. Oh, this is going to turn everything on its head. And geologically speaking, Master Kuthumi tells us about that as well, and the adjustments of ideas which will be required. We might here note that the fact that the word Ibez is literally in the nature of an acrostic veiling the true name of the planetary logos of the Earth, one of whose principles is working through Sanat Kumara, making him thus a direct incarnation of the planetary logos and an expression of the divine consciousness. So, well, I suppose we'll have to solve that We'll have to solve that one later. Nature of an acrostic veiling the name of the planetary logos. So here we have a definition. There are a number of them from the Wikipedia of the word acrostic. And acrostic is a poem or other form of writing in which the first letter or syllable or word of each line or paragraph or other recurring feature in the text spells out a word, message, or the alphabet. Just think about ask and you shall receive, seek and you shall find, knock and it shall be open to you. And then the first letters of each of those sentences spells the word ask. Well, anyway, what's said here next is very occult. These 4 letters are the first letters of the real names of the 4 avatars, of the 4 globes of our earth chain who have embodied 4 of the divine principles. Maybe the first 4, as we have not reached the others yet. Now, how shall we know what those real names are? Always real names are hidden from us, and we're given, even the word Om is perhaps not the ultimate sacred word. He seems to have said that. It's a symbolic word. These 4 letters are the first letters of the real names of the 4 avatars on the 4 globes of our earth chain who have embodied 4 divine principles. And so obviously, great, whoopsie, that's no good. Okay, so let me get back to the correct copy. So these are great beings, and maybe aspects, maybe, who knows, emanated aspects of our planetary logos. The letters I, B, E, Z are not the true Sensar letters. Well, I is a 9, B is a 2, E is a 5, Z is an 8. They are not the true Sensar letters, if such an inaccurate expression can be used of an old ideographic language or of an ideographic language, but are simply a Europeanized distortion. So we are very far from the true meaning. The true meaning is only conveyed at the 4th initiation, 4 letters, right? 4 avatars, 4 globes, of which ours is the 4th, taking the 4th initiation in a series of 7. Every globe lord is in the process of taking an initiation, and there are 7 of these globe lords conventionally, and we're dealing with the 4th initiation involving our particular globe lord, who is the 4th. The true meaning is only conveyed at the 4th initiation when the nature of the planetary logos is revealed and his 4 avatars are definitely contacted through the direct mediatory work of Sanat Kumara. So I would just say we can't know much about this, but just note the numerological resonance. There are relations here, and the number 4 speaks to the kind of round we're in right now, and the revelations accord with the number. Number 7, let's see now. There's a lot here, and I think we're not going to be able to do it all, not in a 1-hour program. A word now as regards to the Ibizan adepts and their mysteries. It is necessary to point out that the whole trend of their work was in a way different, and necessarily so, to the adepts at this time. And we might say there were Lemurian requirements, requirements. Their objective was to stimulate mysticism and the stimulating of the kingdom of God within the human atom. Maybe then not so hard to contact as after the crystallizing effect of the concrete mind. The nature of their work is most difficult for the average man at this time to comprehend, owing to the different state of his consciousness. The Ibizan adepts had to deal with the humanity which was in its infancy, whose polarization was most unstable and whose coordination very imperfect in those, huge tabernacles of clay, as they were called. There was very little mentality to be found, and the men were practically altogether astral. And we might say, if not on the astral plane, then, okay, wait a second, if not instinctual. They function even more consciously on the astral plane than on the physical, like many animals do right now, it seems. They sleep a lot. It was part of the work of these early adepts, working under instruction from Shambhala, to develop the energy centers of the human unit, stimulate the brain, and make him fully self-conscious on the physical plane. Okay. So, we try to understand that things then were not as they are now. And that means transporting ourselves a long way back. Okay. Their objective was to bring about a realization of the kingdom of God within, and little attention was paid in the training of their disciples to the bringing about of the realization of God nature in other units. So more internal and not relating to God in the group. It was necessary in those days to employ methods more definitely physical than are permissible now. We might almost say that Hatha yoga is a remnant. And these methods of physical stimulation were the same employed, and the laws and energy as they worked through the various centers were taught. These methods of physical stimulation were employed, and the laws of energy as they worked through various centers were taught until the time when another big change was made in hierarchical methods, and the door from the animal kingdom into the human kingdom was closed, and the door of initiation was open. Then a big change when the door of initiation was opened in mid-Atlantis, I suppose. It was felt that, although there was some initiation of an early kind in Lemuria, it was felt that at that time that man was then self-centered enough and individualized enough to permit of a drastic change in method and practice. All this took a vast period of time and is the remnants of the earlier temple practices which have come down to us in the degraded phallic teaching and the tantric magic and practices of the Hatha yogis. And, so many people who are embracing Tantra of this kind enthusiastically and Hatha yoga enthusiastically do not realize its ancient origin and that it should have been outlived. The infant humanity of Lemurian and early Atlantean days had to be taught what they were by means of symbols and methods which to us would be crude, impossible, and of a nature which the race should have transcended for many millions of years. All right, well, we're at that point now on page 381, and I think we began all this on page 374. Is that correct? I hope so. Yep, it is. 374 to 381. Relatively a lot of reading for us. Okay, so now let us confirm that so that we know where we're going when we start again at number 8. So this is all about the evolution of the Temple of Ibez and its effect upon humanity. And 374 to 381, and our day is the 5th of September, and we don't have to worry about that 370. Okay. And this is Rule 10, and it's 26. And we'll be going on next to program number 43 and Rule 10, and it'll be 1027, and we start at page 381. Well, it's very interesting, isn't it, about the founding of spirituality upon our planet, the kind of spirituality that we are pursuing, its ancient origins, its expansion of history, human history, to a point which few intelligent people can as yet accept. Okay, friends, that'll be it. You'll notice my little image has been missing here. I just decided to do this straight when I could, and it's maybe a little faster this way. Okay, but I've been with you, and we will continue talking about the founding of the Temple of Ibez. And, the history, the founding of the hierarchy, or we might say the establishing of Shambhala and its branch, eventually the hierarchy. It seems that hierarchy and Shambhala were pretty much amalgamated at that time and did not have such distinct functions, but later the differentiation, I think, occurred. Okay, friends, we'll be talking to you soon, and we'll go on from page 381.